was inspired to create housing injustice based upon my own experience with housing insecurity and homelessness. And I remember when I first stayed at UConn by myself and the campus was completely empty, I thought to myself, I cannot be the only person on this planet going through this right now. I cannot be the only person out of 30,000 students that has been in this situation before. My name is Brianna and I'm an undergraduate at the University of Connecticut, and I'm studying music education, and I was granted the Bold Women's Leadership Network Scholarship. Homelessness is when you are lacking a shelter. You may be sleeping on a park bench, you may be sleeping in a tent, you may be sleeping on the grass on the New Haven Green. Like, you are down and out, you're just looking for a place, literal shelter, literal cover over you, and you don't have that. So although you may be moving through transitional housing and stuff, or you may be sleeping in a van, that's not legitimate shelter because it doesn't offer food, water, electricity, the basic things that humans need to sustain themselves. When you're homeless, you don't have that. So with housing insecurity, you may have that shelter in those four walls. You may have a bed. However, it's not on your own terms. You may be flipping from house to house, sleeping on someone's couch here, sleeping on someone's living room floor here. Yes, you have food and water and electricity. However, it's not your actual place. It's like you're staying with someone temporarily and you're just trying to figure out what's gonna come next because you're acting out of a means of survival and you don't want to end up at the point where you are homeless and you don't have that shelter, food, water, electricity. So the topic of college housing insecurity and college homelessness is particularly important to me because I've been through it, and I didn't even realize I was going through it until it was far too late. And I think there's this understanding that a lot of people in the public sphere have that college students cannot be homeless. College students cannot be housing insecure, which is completely false. Homelessness and housing insecurity has impacted me personally since I was in high school. When I was a sophomore in high school, I was in and out of the house. There was a lot of domestic violence, a lot of domestic abuse going on in my biological family. So for me, I didn't really understand that I was housing insecure because I saw it as a high schooler as an extended sleepover. So the moment that I realized that I was going through housing insecurity and homelessness was when I stayed at the University of Connecticut in the dorms for the first time. So I stayed there throughout the winter intersession. And I remember going to my student support services advisor and I just started sobbing. And I was like, Carl, we're supposed to move out in a week and I don't know what I'm gonna do. And I knew I was first generation. I didn't know I was an independent student. I didn't know you could put that on the FAFSA. And I ended up telling my advisor all of this in one sitting, catching him up with the entirety of my life. I was able to connect with another advisor, Alex Katz, who was working with this huge caseload of students who were just like me. And the realization didn't really hit until all the housing was settled, I was able to stay in the dorm, and all the kids left, and it was silent. My experience as a student who has been through housing insecurity and homelessness has been significantly different from my friends. I think that, the typical college student has at least one parent that they can rely on, or even if they're a student in the foster care system, they have a caseworker. I'm not saying that the caseworkers are perfect, but I don't really have anybody. At least I didn't have anybody until I was really, really struggling and asking for help, and that's when I met Alex Katz. But prior to that, I didn't have anybody. So my experience has just been bittersweet because you see people invite all of their family members to things like family weekend. So I would say that my experience in college has not been the fun, glamorous, exciting thing that you might expect, because what I put out on social media and what I put out in terms of this is what I'm doing at UConn and this is what I've accomplished so far, that didn't happen with all smiles and rainbows. It happened like this, sitting down with myself and crying and realizing this is your circumstance, so how are you going to make it better? Most college students aren't sitting there every single day thinking, okay, what comes next? Where am I gonna live? Where am I gonna sleep? Where am I gonna eat? People don't question that as often as someone who has been through housing insecurity and homelessness and the constant shuffling from office to office and feeling like you're a burden just for being alive. So I feel like college has been really rewarding, but it's also been really hard to feel like I'm in college. So that's why I decided to create Housing Injustice, and the idea is that if we can get enough people to describe this phenomenon and really share their story, we can start to understand what these patterns of housing insecurity are coming from and how they're proliferating through college and how people are actually trying to stabilize themselves while still trying to keep up a good GPA, while still being students, while trying to be social. This is not to evoke sympathy, it is to evoke empathy and understanding and creating these table talks and these conversations around this phenomenon that is most definitely real. So recruiting participants was really hard because how do you go up to someone and say, hey, have you ever been homeless? Have you ever been housing insecure? Do you mind sitting in front of a camera and telling us about that? You know how many no's I got before I got one yes? It was extremely difficult to find people who were willing to talk about this, and honestly, I'm having difficulty talking about it right now, and this is my own project. I would say the most rewarding part about conducting this project is just seeing it come to fruition, right? This was an idea, housing injustice was an idea that I had long ago, probably since my sophomore year or the beginning of my second year at UConn, when I realized, again, I can't be the only one going through this. So I think that my ultimate goal is to get people to realize that housing insecurity looks so different for so many people. It doesn't always mean sleeping on a couch. Sometimes it means you're sleeping in your car. Sometimes it means you're sleeping on someone's living room floor. Sometimes it means that you're staying in a dorm. So it may look like someone has your back, but in reality, once that university lets you go, there is no dorm. So housing insecurity in college and homelessness looks so different for so many different people. At the University of Connecticut, I would like to see more support in the institutionalized resources that are being given to students. So it's great that we have things like the Dean of Students and we have student support services. However, I think what we really need is a centralized office that is catering specifically to students that are housing insecure and homeless, because that's a really big part of someone's identity. Not having a place to live impacts every single thing that you do in your life. It's one of those basic tiers. And if you don't have that housing when you come to college, how are you expected to keep up with your academics? It would be way more attainable and accessible for students to not have to tell their story over and over again to a new person in a new office. Because when it comes to students that are housing insecure or homeless, you have to establish that trust between yourself and an adult in order to share your story. It is a lot of energy to bring up something that happened to you that was traumatic. A lot of us are already experiencing PTSD. And when we come to college, we know that we're different from our peers. The biggest goal that I would have is to have some sort of community house at my university where there'd be at least 16 to 20 beds where students can come when they're transitioning from housing. Last summer, I went to visit Los Angeles, and while I was in LA, I met up with some students from the University of Southern California who piloted and initiated the Trojan Shelter. And there's also another student-run shelter at UCLA called the Bruin Shelter. So there's already universities creating this community house model. They're being funded primarily by grants. Students apply for a bed and then they're given a specific amount of time in which they can stay. Now, while they're staying, they're not just getting free food and water and a bed. They're getting a caseworker. They're getting therapists and mental health representatives. They're getting people that can literally help them transition to more stable housing. I think if we had a community house or some sort of transitional space where there were mental health workers and healthcare workers on site that could help these students in transition, that would help significantly. But honestly, I think the first step is getting the information out and showing people this is a very real issue and this is something we have to start talking about.